The evening wind sweeps gently across the weathered limestone of the Temple Mount, carrying with it the quiet dust of the ancient Near East. The sun dips below the jagged horizon of the Judean hills, casting long, melancholic shadows over the city of Jerusalem. It is the 5th century before the Common Era, specifically around the year 443 BCE. The vast Achaemenid Persian Empire stretches across the known world. Yet here, in the small agrarian subprovince of Yehud, life is defined not by imperial conquests, but by a profound and unsettling spiritual stillness. More than 90 years have passed since the first wave of Jewish exiles miraculously returned from Babylon under the decree of Cyrus. The protective walls of Jerusalem have been rebuilt under the governance of Nehemiah. The Second Temple stands firmly upon its sacred foundation, its altars smoking with daily sacrifices. By all historical and archaeological accounts, the physical restoration of the nation is remarkably complete. Yet beneath the surface of this rebuilt society, a quiet, insidious decay has taken root. The vibrant, tearful joy of the early returnees has slowly faded into the mundane, grinding routine of daily agrarian survival. The miraculous deliverance of their ancestors now feels like a distant, almost mythical memory, replaced by the heavy, cynical reality of life as a minor province under Persian domination. This raises a profound historical and spiritual question, one that echoes through the complex corridors of Second Temple history. Why did a nation that had been so miraculously restored from the ashes of exile so quickly lose its spiritual fervor? How did the descendants of those who once wept by the rivers of Babylon become a people who now casually offer blind, lame, and sick animals upon the holy altar of Jehovah? The physical structures of their faith are entirely intact, the priesthood is functioning, and the festivals are observed, but the heart of their covenant relationship has grown dangerously cold. The people are merely going through the motions, their worship reduced to a hollow, mechanical ritual. Into this atmosphere of creeping apathy steps a mysterious figure, the final prophetic voice of the Hebrew Scriptures. He is known simply as Malachi, a name that translates to "my messenger." He does not arrive with the fiery, sweeping visions of Isaiah, nor the deeply personal lamentations of Jeremiah. Instead, the prophet Malachi brings a unique, penetrating literary style, a divine disputation. He delivers God's words, and immediately the people talk back. "I have loved you, saith the Lord," the prophet declares. Yet the people, weary and cynical, respond, "Wherein hast thou loved us?" This is not merely a sermon, it is a covenant lawsuit. It is the Creator of the heavens and the earth calling His chosen people into the courtroom of history, demanding an answer for their spiritual complacency. Malachi is tasked with delivering God's final rebuke, a necessary purification before the heavens fall silent for 400 years. As the last light of day fades from the sacred mount, our journey moves away from the silent, weathered stones of the temple courtyard. We descend into the bustling, yet spiritually hollow streets of the Persian province of Yehud to understand the world that necessitated this final, urgent message. The narrow, sun-baked streets of Jerusalem unfold beneath the fading afternoon light. Dust rises gently from the packed earth as merchants begin to gather their wares, and farmers guide their weary donkeys toward the city gates. This is not the grand capital of David or Solomon. This is something far smaller, far more modest, and far more fragile. This is the province of Yehud, a quiet corner of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire, and the world in which the prophet Malachi would deliver his final urgent message to the people of Israel. To understand the weight of Malachi's words, one must first understand the empire that surrounds him. By the middle of the 5th century before the Common Era, the Persian Empire stretches from the Indus River in the east to the borders of Egypt in the west. It is the largest empire the ancient world has yet known, encompassing dozens of peoples, languages, and religions under a single administrative system. The Persian kings, Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius, Xerxes, and now Artaxerxes, rule from magnificent capitals at Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana. Their authority is maintained through a sophisticated network of satraps, royal roads, and provincial governors who ensure the steady flow of tribute and obedience from the farthest reaches of the empire. The famous royal road, stretching over 1,500 miles from Susa to Sardis in western Anatolia, allows royal messengers to traverse the empire in a matter of days, carrying decrees, tax assessments, and military orders with remarkable speed. The territory that includes the province of Yehud falls within the vast satrapy known in Aramaic as Ebernari, meaning beyond the river. This administrative region encompasses all the lands west of the Euphrates, including Syria, Phoenicia, the coastal plains of Philistia, and the small hill country province where the Jewish community has resettled. The satrap who governs this enormous region resides far to the north, likely in Damascus or another major administrative center. Within this sprawling satrapy, Yehud is barely a footnote. It is not a kingdom. It is not a nation. It is a minor sub-province, governed not by a descendant of David sitting upon a throne, but by a Peha, a Persian-appointed governor who answers to distant imperial authorities. This political reality represents a profound shift in Second Temple history. For 4 centuries, the people of Judah had lived under the rule of their own kings, the descendants of David, who sat in Jerusalem and administered justice, led armies, and maintained the temple. That world ended in 586 BCE when the Babylonian armies of Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the city, burned the temple, and carried the population into exile. Now, nearly a century and a half later, the people have returned, but the throne remains empty. There is no king in Jerusalem. There is no independent army. There is no sovereign foreign policy. The transition from Babylonian to Persian rule, which occurred when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, changed the name of the imperial overlord, but did not restore the political independence of Judah. The people of the covenant remain subjects of a foreign emperor, and their daily existence is shaped by Persian administrative decrees, taxation demands, and the quiet, grinding reality of imperial oversight. It is into this world that the opening words of the book arrive with solemn gravity. Malachi chapter 1, verse 1 reads, "The burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi." The Hebrew word translated as burden is massa, a term that carries the weight of an oracle, a heavy pronouncement, a message that presses down upon the one who receives it. This is not a gentle greeting or a casual observation. It is a divine pronouncement delivered through the prophet Malachi to a people who have grown accustomed to the silence of heaven. Among the post-exilic prophets, Malachi stands alone as the final voice, the last messenger before a long period of prophetic silence descends upon the nation. The geographic boundaries of this small province further illustrate the vulnerability of its inhabitants. Yehud in the 5th century is a compact territory, roughly centered on Jerusalem and extending perhaps 20 to 30 miles in each direction. The terrain is rugged, defined by limestone ridges, narrow wadis, and terraced hillsides that demand constant labor to cultivate. To the north, the Samaritan community, centered around Mount Gerizim, views the Jerusalem temple with suspicion and rivalry, and the political tension between these two communities occasionally erupts into open hostility. To the east, beyond the Jordan River, the Ammonites and Moabites maintain their ancient territories and their ancient hostilities. To the south, the Edomites press against the borders, while nomadic tribes raid the fringes of settled agricultural land. The people of Yehud live surrounded, constrained, and perpetually aware of their smallness in a world of larger, more powerful neighbors. Archaeological evidence from this period paints a picture of modest, struggling existence rather than imperial grandeur. Excavations in the city of David have revealed Persian-era domestic structures built of rough fieldstone with simple clay floors and basic cooking installations. The pottery recovered from these layers is functional and unadorned: storage jars, cooking pots, and simple bowls that speak of an agrarian people concerned with survival rather than luxury. There is no evidence of grand palaces or monumental public architecture from this period. The city of Jerusalem in the time of Malachi is confined largely to the narrow ridge of the city of David and the adjacent Temple Mount, a modest settlement of perhaps a few thousand souls. The population of the entire province is estimated to be no more than 30 to 50,000 people, scattered across small villages and farmsteads that dot the central hill country. Yet one of the most remarkable archaeological witnesses to this era is found not in the stones of buildings, but in the small silver coins minted by the province itself. Known as Yehud coinage, these tiny silver pieces bear the Aramaic inscription Yehud, the official name of the Persian province. These coins are significant because they confirm that Yehud possessed a degree of local administrative authority, the right to mint its own currency, however small and modest. The coins are stamped with simple images: a falcon, a lily, or the head of a Persian official. They are small, roughly the size of a modern lentil, and they circulated in the markets and fields of the province. Some bear the name of a local governor or a high priest, linking the economic life of the province directly to its administrative and religious leadership. For the historian, they are tangible proof that the community of returned exiles maintained a recognized, if limited, administrative identity within the Persian system. They were not merely refugees, they were a province with a name, a governor, and a treasury, however humble. The role of the Peha, the governor, was critical to this administrative structure. Unlike the kings of old, the governor held no military authority and no divine right of rule. He was appointed by the Persian satrap, or in some cases, directly by the king. His responsibilities were practical: collecting taxes, maintaining order, overseeing local disputes, and ensuring that the province met its obligations to the empire. During the period of Malachi's ministry, this role was likely filled by a figure working alongside the high priest, creating a dual leadership structure in which civil and religious authority shared the burden of governance. The temple itself functioned not only as a place of worship, but as an economic center, a repository for tithes and offerings, and a symbol of the community's identity within the larger Persian system. It is a system that functions, but it lacks the prophetic fire and royal grandeur of earlier centuries. In this quiet, constrained world, the people of Yehud go about their days. They plant their vineyards on the terraced hillsides. They harvest their grain in the narrow valleys. They press their olives in the autumn and gather their grapes in the summer heat. They bring their meager offerings to the temple and return to their modest homes as the sun sets behind the western hills. The empire demands its tribute. The neighbors press at the borders, and the spiritual fervor that once carried them through the fires of exile has slowly, almost imperceptibly, dimmed to a faint ember. Having established the political reality of this small province and the daily rhythms of its inhabitants, the narrative now turns inward, away from the administrative structures and the imperial machinery, to examine the spiritual condition of the people who live within these narrow borders. For it is not the Persian governor or the distant king who concerns the prophet Malachi. It is the state of the heart. The political machinery of the Persian Empire grinds on, indifferent to the small province it governs. But within the narrow borders of Yehud, a quieter, more painful transformation has taken place, one that no imperial decree can address and no governor can reverse. To understand the spiritual apathy that Malachi confronts, one must trace the long, slow erosion of hope that defines this generation. The story of Second Temple history is not merely a record of stones and altars. It is the story of a people who once wept with joy at the prospect of restoration, only to find that the reality of restoration fell painfully short of the glory they had been promised. The journey begins nearly a century before Malachi's ministry, in the year 537 BCE. The Persian king Cyrus, having conquered Babylon, issues a remarkable decree permitting the exiled peoples of his empire to return to their ancestral lands and rebuild their temples. For the Jewish community in Babylon, this decree is nothing short of miraculous. The prophets had spoken of a 70-year desolation, and now, as the decades close, the words of Jeremiah and Isaiah are fulfilled. Under the leadership of Zerubbabel, a descendant of David, and Jeshua the high priest, approximately 50,000 men, women, and children undertake the long, dangerous journey westward, crossing the vast Mesopotamian plains and ascending into the hill country of Judah. The emotions of that first generation are overwhelming. The Book of Ezra records that when the returned exiles lay the foundation of the new temple, the sound of their mingled weeping and shouting can be heard from a great distance. The younger generation shouts with joy, but the older men, those who had seen the glory of Solomon's temple before its destruction, weep aloud. Their grief mingles with the celebration, creating a sound that is neither purely joyful nor purely sorrowful, but something achingly complex. The foundation is laid, but every eye that remembers the former house knows that this new structure will be smaller, simpler, and less adorned than what once stood upon this sacred mount. Yet even this modest beginning faces immediate opposition. The surrounding peoples, the Samaritans to the north, the Ammonites and Moabites to the east, view the rebuilding of Jerusalem with suspicion and hostility. They send letters to the Persian court, accusing the Jews of rebellion and sedition. The work on the temple halts. For nearly 18 years, the foundation stones lie exposed to the elements, and the returned exiles turn their attention to their own homes, their own fields, and their own survival. The grand vision of restoration grows dim beneath the weight of daily necessity and political obstruction. It is into this stalled, discouraged community that the prophets Haggai and Zechariah step in the year 520 BCE. Their message is urgent and specific. The people have neglected the house of God while adorning their own homes. Haggai challenges them directly, asking whether it is right for them to dwell in paneled houses while the temple lies waste. Zechariah supplements this call with visions of future glory, of a coming branch, of a Jerusalem exalted among the nations. Stirred by these prophetic voices, the people resume construction, and in the year 515 BCE, exactly 70 years after the destruction of Solomon's temple, the Second Temple is completed and dedicated. But the dedication is bittersweet. Haggai chapter 2, verses 3 through 9 captures the tension with painful honesty. Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do ye see it now? Is it not in your eyes in comparison of it as nothing? The older generation remembers gold, cedar, and the overwhelming presence of the divine. What stands before them now is modest, functional, and conspicuously lacking in the sacred furnishings of old. The Ark of the Covenant is absent. The Urim and Thummim are gone. The visible cloud of divine glory does not fill this new house as it once filled the former. Yet Haggai assures them, "The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former, saith the Lord of hosts. And in this place will I give peace, saith the Lord of hosts." This promise becomes the anchor of expectation for the generations that follow. The people wait, they watch the horizon. They listen for the sound of nations being shaken, for the overthrow of empires, for the exaltation of Jerusalem to the center of the world. The prophet spoke of a coming shaking of all nations, of the desire of all nations arriving, of silver and gold flowing into this place. But the decades pass. Persia remains Persia. The satrap still collects his tribute. The governor still answers to a foreign throne. And the Second Temple, though functioning and attended, remains modest, unadorned, and far from the radiant center of the world that the prophets seem to describe. The years accumulate. By the time of Ezra's arrival in 468 BCE, nearly 70 years have passed since the first return. Ezra brings a fresh wave of spiritual reform, teaching the law publicly and addressing the problem of intermarriage. Then, in 455 BCE, Nehemiah arrives as governor, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem in a remarkable 52 days and instituting further reforms. Yet even Nehemiah's energetic leadership cannot fully reverse the tide of spiritual decline. By the time of Malachi's ministry, around 443 BCE, the walls stand, the temple functions, and the priesthood serves. But the fire has gone out. This is the spiritual landscape that defines the book of Malachi. In summary, the people have not abandoned their religion. They still bring sacrifices. They still observe the festivals. They still call upon the name of Jehovah, but their worship has become mechanical, their devotion transactional, and their expectations exhausted. The grand prophetic promises of Haggai and Zechariah, the shaking of nations, the filling of the temple with glory, the immediate establishment of divine rule, have not materialized in their lifetimes. And so a quiet, corrosive cynicism has settled over the province like dust over forgotten stones. Archaeological evidence from this period confirms the modesty of the material reality. Persian-era pottery shards recovered from the city of David reveal simple, undecorated wares. Storage jars for grain and oil, plain cooking pots, and basic serving bowls. There is no imported luxury ware, no evidence of significant trade wealth, no golden age of prosperity. The domestic structures are small, built of fieldstone, with packed earth floors and simple hearths. The people of Yehud are farmers, herders, and laborers, not merchants of empire. Their wealth is measured in bushels of grain and jars of oil, not in silver or gold. The geographic confines of the city reinforce this sense of limitation. Rebuilt Jerusalem in the 5th century occupies primarily the narrow ridge of the City of David and the adjacent Temple Mount platform. The broad expanses of the Old City, the western hill that once housed the royal palace and the homes of the wealthy, remain largely unoccupied or sparsely settled. The population is small, the resources are limited, and the horizon, both physical and spiritual, feels constrained. The people look out from their modest walls and see not a glorious future, but the same dusty hills, the same demanding fields, and the same distant Persian overlord. It is this weariness that produces the words Malachi records in chapter 2, verse 17. Ye have wearied the Lord with your words, yet ye say, wherein have we wearied him? When ye say, every one that doeth evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delighteth in them, or where is the God of judgment? The people are not merely asking a theological question. They are expressing the exhaustion of a generation that has waited, hoped, built, and now wonders whether any of it mattered. The wicked seem to prosper, the righteous seem forgotten, and God seems silent. From this internal landscape of apathy and quiet despair, the narrative now turns to the prophet's opening response. Before the rebuke begins, before the specific failures are named, God speaks first not of judgment, but of love. It is a declaration that will anchor everything that follows, a reminder that even in the midst of spiritual exhaustion, the covenant remains unbroken. The weariness of the post-exilic generation hangs heavy over the province of Yehud. The people have built, planted, sacrificed, and waited, yet the world remains unchanged. The nations have not been shaken. The glory has not filled the temple. And so the question lingers in the dusty air like smoke from a cold altar. Does God still love us? Has the covenant been forgotten? Is the relationship between Jehovah and his people merely a memory, maintained out of obligation rather than affection? It is precisely here, in the midst of this quiet spiritual exhaustion, that the book of Malachi opens with a declaration that is both tender and confrontational. Malachi chapter 1 verse 2 records the words of the Almighty. I have loved you, saith the Lord. There is no preamble, no lengthy introduction, no genealogy or historical prologue. The prophet steps into the spiritual void of his generation and speaks the most fundamental truth of the covenant. God's love for his people is not contingent upon their circumstances, their prosperity, or their political independence. It is rooted in his sovereign choice, his unchanging purpose, and his faithfulness to the promises made to the patriarchs. But the people, hardened by decades of unmet expectations and grinding daily labor, respond with a cynicism that cuts to the heart of the matter. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? The question is not merely rhetorical. It is the voice of a generation that has looked at their modest fields, their small city, their subordinate status within a foreign empire, and concluded that love must look like prosperity, power, and visible glory. If God loved them, surely their circumstances would reflect it. Since they do not, the people reason, perhaps the love has faded, or perhaps it never existed in the form they imagined. God's answer is unexpected. He does not point to the temple standing in Jerusalem. He does not remind them of the return from Babylon or the rebuilding of the walls. Instead, he reaches back to the very origins of the nation, to the twin brothers born to Isaac and Rebekah, and poses a question that reframes the entire discussion. Was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I love Jacob. The reference is deliberate and profound. In any summary of the Book of Malachi, this opening exchange establishes the theological foundation for everything that follows. God's love is not measured by material blessing or political elevation. It is measured by covenant faithfulness, by the sovereign choice that set apart a people for himself before they had done anything to earn or deserve it. The mention of Esau immediately draws the listener's attention southward, beyond the agrarian hills of Judah, into the harsh, mountainous wilderness that stretches from the southern rim of the Dead Sea toward the Gulf of Aqaba. This is the land of Edom, the territory of Esau's descendants, a nation that once occupied the rugged highlands of the southern Transjordan. The geography of Edom stands in stark contrast to the cultivated terraces of Yehud. Where Judah possesses arable soil, seasonal rainfall, and the infrastructure of settled agriculture, Edom is defined by red sandstone cliffs, deep wadis, and narrow mountain passes. The very name Edom, meaning red, evokes the ruddy hue of the exposed rock and the ancient memory of Esau, who was himself described as red and hairy at his birth. For centuries, the Edomites maintained a fierce independence in this rugged terrain. Their capital, Bozrah, sat in a defensible position amid the mountain strongholds. The prophet Obadiah, writing perhaps 2 centuries before Malachi, had described Edom's pride in these words: The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high. That saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? The Edomites trusted in their geography, their elevation, and their military strength. They believed themselves untouchable, perched above the valleys where empires marched and armies clashed. But Edom's sin was not merely pride, it was betrayal. When the Babylonian armies of Nebuchadnezzar breached the walls of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and set fire to the temple, the Edomites did not weep for their brother nation. They rejoiced. The psalmist captured the bitterness of that moment in Psalm 137, verse 7. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, Raise it, even to the foundation thereof. Edom had stood at the crossroads, cutting off the escape of fleeing Judeans, handing survivors over to the Babylonian conquerors, and looting the remnants of a destroyed city. The prophet Obadiah condemned this treachery explicitly. Thou shouldest not have stood on the other side in the day that he carried away captive his forces, and strangers entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even as one of them. Now, in the time of Malachi, the consequences of that ancient betrayal are unfolding in real time. The prophet declares in verses 3 through 5, And I hated Esau, and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. The language is vivid and final. The mountains of Edom, once considered impregnable, are being laid desolate. The heritage of Esau is being stripped away, given over to the jackals and the wild creatures of the empty places. This is not merely poetic imagery, it is a description of geopolitical events that were reshaping the ancient Near East during the 5th century before the Common Era. The agents of Edom's displacement are the Nabatean Arabs, a nomadic and semi-nomadic people who had long inhabited the fringes of the Arabian desert to the south and east. During the Persian period, the Nabateans began a slow but inexorable migration northward and westward, pressing into the territories of Edom. They controlled the vital incense trade routes that connected the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean coast, and their growing economic power translated into territorial expansion. Over the course of the 5th and 4th centuries, the Nabateans gradually pushed the Edomites out of their ancestral homeland south of the Dead Sea, forcing them to migrate westward into the southern territories of Judah, a region that would later be known by the Greek name Idumea. Archaeological evidence supports this dramatic shift in occupancy. The ancient Edomite sites, including the remains at Bozrah and the early settlements around what would later become the magnificent Nabatean city of Petra, show clear evidence of cultural transition during this period. Edomite pottery, characterized by its distinctive painted designs and forms, gradually disappears from the archaeological record, replaced by Nabatean material culture. The shift is not sudden but progressive, reflecting a gradual displacement rather than a single catastrophic conquest. The mountains of Esau are, quite literally, being inherited by another people. Yet Edom, in its displacement, responds with the same stubborn pride that characterized its earlier history. Malachi records their defiant words in verse 4. Whereas Edom saith, We are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Even in ruin, even in exile from their own mountains, the Edomites refuse to accept the finality of God's judgment. They will rebuild, they will restore, they will reclaim what has been taken. It is the voice of human determination set against divine decree, and the prophet's response is immediate and absolute. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, They shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. The contrast could not be more stark. On one side stands Jacob, imperfect, struggling, spiritually apathetic, yet loved. On the other stands Esau, proud, defiant, ultimately dispossessed. The people of Yehud who question God's love need only look south to see the answer written in the desolation of Edom's mountains. Love in the biblical sense is not the absence of hardship. It is the presence of covenant faithfulness. Judah endures. Judah has a temple. Judah has a priesthood, a scripture, a future. Edom does not. The mountains of Esau are becoming a wilderness, and no amount of human rebuilding can reverse what the Almighty has decreed. The prophet invites the people to see this with their own eyes. And your eyes shall see, and ye shall say, The Lord will be magnified from the border of Israel. The judgment of Edom is not merely a historical event. It is a visible, observable demonstration of God's sovereign rule over the nations. What He promises, He fulfills. What He decrees, no human effort can overturn. The love that sustains Jacob is the same sovereignty that dismantles Esau. They are two sides of the same divine character, and both are unfolding in the lived experience of the post-exilic generation. Having established this foundational truth that God's love is real, His sovereignty is absolute, and His word endures beyond the rise and fall of nations, The prophet now turns his gaze inward. The lesson of Edom is complete. The external evidence of God's faithfulness is visible on the southern horizon. But within the borders of Yehud, a far more intimate failure demands attention. The prophet's eyes move from the desolate mountains of Esau to the smoking altar of the Second Temple, where the priests of Levi are about to face the most searching examination of their service since the return from exile. The journey from the desolate, wind-swept mountains of Edom brings us back through the heavy stone gates of Jerusalem, ascending the steep steps toward the very heart of the nation's spiritual life, the Temple Mount. In the ancient Near East, the temple was not merely a place of public gathering. It was understood to be the dwelling place of the divine, the sacred nexus where heaven and earth intersected. For the people of Yehud, the Second Temple was the sole remaining anchor of their covenant identity. Yet, as the prophet Malachi turns his gaze from the geopolitical triumphs of God to the daily rituals of his own house, he uncovers a scandal that strikes at the very foundation of their relationship with the Almighty. It is a scandal not of complex theology, but of basic honor. Malachi, chapter 1, verse 6 opens with a profound rhetorical question rooted in the most fundamental social structures of the ancient world. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you, O priests, that despise my name. In the broader study of Second Temple history, this era marks a tragic low point in the spiritual life of the nation. The indictment is directed specifically at the priests, the spiritual gatekeepers who controlled access to the altar. In the ancient world, a son naturally honors his father, and a servant naturally reveres his master. These relationships are built on inherent respect and the recognition of authority. But in the province of Yehud, the priests, those entrusted with mediating the presence of Jehovah, have lost this fundamental sense of reverence. When confronted with this devastating charge, their response is one of genuine, perhaps even indignant, confusion. And ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? They do not see their own failure. They do not recognize the disrespect in their daily routines. To them, the altar is functioning, the smoke is rising, and the festivals are being observed. But God sees what they have normalized. He points directly to the physical reality of their worship. Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar. In the Levitical system, the bread and the animal sacrifices were the tangible expressions of Israel's devotion, gratitude, and repentance. To offer polluted or defiled bread was to treat the Creator of the universe with the casual disdain one might reserve for a beggar. To understand the gravity of this offense, one must look back to the strict, uncompromising standards established in the Mosaic Law. Leviticus chapter 22, verses 17 through 25, lays out the absolute requirements for any animal brought to the altar. It must be a male without blemish. It cannot be blind, broken, maimed, or having a wen, scurvy, or scab. The sacrificial system was designed to teach a profound spiritual truth. The approach to a holy God requires perfection, wholeness, and the giving of one's very best. The animal was a substitute, a representation of the worshiper's own life and devotion. When a farmer brought a sacrifice, he was supposed to select the finest, healthiest specimen from his flock. But in the economically strained environment of the Persian period, The cost of devotion had become a burden the people were no longer willing to bear. The agrarian economy of Yehud was fragile. Droughts, heavy imperial taxation, and the constant threat of crop failure meant that every healthy sheep or goat was a vital economic asset. A blind or lame animal, on the other hand, was practically worthless in the marketplace. It could not be sold for wool, it could not be used for breeding, and its meat was of poor quality. And so, a quiet, insidious compromise took root. The people began bringing their cast-off, defective animals to the temple, keeping the valuable, unblemished livestock for themselves. But the true failure lay not just with the people. It lay with the priests who accepted them. The priests were the inspectors, the gatekeepers of the altar. According to the law, it was their sacred duty to reject any blemished offering. But the priests of Malachi's day were struggling financially, just like the rest of the populace. They relied on the portions of the sacrifices allotted to them for their own sustenance. Furthermore, they faced immense social pressure. To reject the offering of a wealthy landowner or a powerful local figure risked offending a patron and jeopardizing their own social standing. So they looked the other way. They accepted the blind, the lame, and the sick, rationalizing that an offering was better than no offering at all. In doing so, they dragged the holiness of the altar into the mud of economic convenience and social compromise. The prophet exposes the sheer arrogance of this behavior in Malachi chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. But ye have profaned it, in that ye say, The table of the Lord is polluted, and the fruit thereof, even his meat, is contemptible. Ye said also, Behold, what a weariness is it! And ye have snuffed at it, saith the Lord of hosts. And ye brought that which was torn, and the lame, and the sick. Thus ye brought an offering. Should I accept this of your hand? Saith the Lord. The phrase snuffed at it is deeply revealing. It conveys an attitude of bored contempt, a heavy sigh of annoyance at the requirements of God. Worship, which should have been the highest joy and privilege of the nation, had devolved into a tedious chore. The priests viewed the altar not as the throne room of the King of Kings, but as a burdensome workplace. They rolled their eyes at the strictness of the law and sighed at the effort required to maintain true holiness. To highlight the absurdity of their spiritual apathy, Malachi draws a sharp, piercing contrast with their secular obligations. In verse 8, he asks them to consider their earthly reality. And if ye offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if ye offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? The Peha, the Persian governor, was a man of flesh and blood, a subordinate official in a foreign empire. Yet, if the priests attempted to pay their imperial taxes with defective grain, or if they tried to present a blind, diseased animal as a gift to the governor's palace, they would be swiftly rejected, perhaps even punished for their insult. They knew exactly how to show respect to earthly authority. They knew how to curate their best offerings when their own physical safety or financial standing was on a line. Yet, when standing before the invisible, eternal Creator of the heavens and the earth, the very same men offered their garbage. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, and it reveals a heart that no longer truly believes God is watching, or that He possesses the power to enforce His will. Because of this profound desecration, God issues a shocking declaration that must have sent ripples of outrage through the priestly courts. In Malachi chapter 1, verse 11, he says, "For from the rising of the sun, even unto the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. And in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering, for my name shall be great among the heathen, saith the Lord of hosts." While the covenant people are offering polluted bread and sick animals, the nations outside the covenant, the Gentiles, the heathen, are offering pure devotion. This is not necessarily a statement that pagan sacrifices are literally accepted by Jehovah, but rather a profound prophetic indictment of Israel's failure. God is declaring that his ultimate purpose will not be thwarted by the apathy of Yehud. If the priests of Levi refuse to honor him, he will raise up a pure priesthood from among the nations. The contrast shames the covenant breakers. The outsiders are treating the divine with more inherent reverence than the insiders. The chapter concludes with a severe curse upon the deceitful worshiper. Verse 14 pronounces, "But cursed be the deceiver, which hath in his flock a male, and voweth and sacrificeth unto the Lord a corrupt thing. For I am a great king, saith the Lord of hosts, and my name is dreadful among the heathen." The deceiver is the man who makes a vow to God in a moment of desperation or piety, promising a perfect male from his flock, but when the time comes to pay the vow, he substitutes a sickly, corrupt animal, keeping the valuable one for himself. It is a calculated fraud, a spiritual embezzlement. Any thorough Book of Malachi summary must highlight this central conflict, the disconnect between the people's casual worship and God's absolute holiness. God reminds them of his true identity. I am a great king. The people of Yehud had forgotten the majesty of their sovereign. They had reduced the Lord of hosts to a local tribal deity who could be managed, manipulated, and appeased with leftovers. The physical corruption of the sacrifices, the blind, the lame, and the sick, was merely a symptom of a much deeper disease. The altar was polluted because the men who stood behind it had forgotten their original purpose. The physical blemishes on the animals mirrored the spiritual blemishes on the souls of the priesthood. To understand how the descendants of Aaron fell so far from the holiness required of them, we must look past the smoke of the altar and examine the ancient sacred mandate given to their ancestors, a mandate known as the Covenant of Levi. The smoke of blemished offerings rises from the altar, carrying with it the weight of a priesthood that has forgotten its purpose. But the corrupted sacrifices are merely the visible symptom of a far deeper wound, one that cuts to the very origins of the Levitical calling itself. To understand how the priests of Yehud arrived at this place of spiritual bankruptcy, one must look back beyond the Persian period, beyond the return from Babylon to the wilderness of Sinai, where the tribe of Levi was set apart for a sacred and demanding vocation. The failure Malachi exposes is not a new problem. It is the culmination of centuries of drift, a slow erosion of purpose that has hollowed out the priesthood from within. The origins of the Levitical priesthood are recorded in the Book of Numbers, chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, where Jehovah speaks to Moses in the wilderness. "Behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine." This was no ordinary appointment. The Levites were not chosen for administrative convenience or political advantage. They were taken as substitutes, set apart in place of every firstborn son in Israel, consecrated entirely to the service of the sanctuary. Their very existence as a tribe was bound to altar to the law and to the people they were appointed to serve. This consecration was formalized into what Scripture calls a covenant. Numbers chapter 18, verse 19 records the divine declaration, "All the heave offerings of the holy things, which the children of Israel offer unto the Lord, have I given thee, and thy sons and thy daughters with thee, by a statute forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord unto thee, and to thy seed with thee." A covenant of salt. In the ancient Near East, salt was a symbol of permanence, preservation, and unbreakable commitment. To make a covenant of salt was to establish a bond that could not be dissolved, a commitment as enduring as the mineral itself. The Levitical covenant was not a temporary arrangement or a conditional contract. It was an eternal bond between God and the tribe of Levi, sealed with the solemnity of divine oath. But this covenant carried with it a specific, demanding mandate. The priests were not merely ritual functionaries. They were not simply the men who slaughtered animals and burned incense. Their primary calling was educational. They were the teachers of Israel, the custodians of the law, the mediators between the holy God and his covenant people. In a society without universal literacy, without printed books, without formal schools, the priest stood at the center of every community as the living repository of divine instruction. When a farmer had a question about clean and unclean animals, when a merchant needed guidance on honest weights and measures, when a family faced a dispute over inheritance or property, it was to the priest they turned. The priest was teacher, judge, counselor, and mediator, all in one. Malachi chapter 2, verse 5 recalls the original beauty of this covenant with language of profound tenderness. "My covenant was with him of life and peace, and I gave them to him for the fear wherewith he feared me, and was afraid before my name." The covenant of Levi was a covenant of life and peace. It was designed to bring wholeness to the community, to mediate reconciliation between God and man, and to preserve the moral and spiritual health of the nation. The ideal priest was one who feared God, who stood in awe of his name, and who transmitted that reverence to the people through faithful teaching and righteous judgment. Verse 6 continues this portrait of the ideal Levite. "The law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and did turn many away from iniquity." This is the standard against which the priests of Malachi's day are measured. The law of truth was in his mouth, not distorted, not selective, not tailored to please the powerful. Truth and iniquity was not found in his lips. The ideal priest walked with God in peace and equity, and his teaching had the power to turn many away from iniquity. This was the priest as God intended, a man whose very presence in the community was a bulwark against moral decay, whose words carried the authority of heaven, and whose life modeled the holiness he proclaimed. But the reality in 5th century Yehud stands in tragic contrast to this ideal. Malachi chapter 2, verses 7 and 8 delivers the devastating indictment. "For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. But ye are departed out of the way. Ye have caused many to stumble at the law. Ye have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith the Lord of hosts. The word messenger here is malach in Hebrew, the same root from which the name Malachi is derived. The priest is called to be God's messenger, his representative, his ambassador to the people. But the priests of Yehud have departed from the way. They have not merely failed in their personal conduct, they have actively caused others to stumble. Their distorted teaching, their selective application of the law, their willingness to compromise for social and economic advantage, these failures have sent the entire community into moral confusion. The consequences of this failure are severe and immediate. In Malachi chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, the prophet delivers a warning that must have struck terror into the hearts of the priestly families. And now, O ye priests, this commandment is for you. If ye will not hear, and if ye will not lay it to heart, to give glory unto my name, saith the Lord of hosts, I will even send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Yea, I have cursed them already, because ye do not lay it to heart. Behold, I will corrupt your seed, and spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your solemn feasts, and one shall take you away with it. The language is deliberately harsh, designed to shock a complacent priesthood into awareness. The blessings they expect from their office, the portions of the sacrifices, the tithes of the people, the social prestige of their position, will be cursed. The very seed of their ministry, the next generation of priests, will be corrupted. The dung of the sacrifices, the refuse that should be carried outside the camp, will be spread upon their faces as a mark of utter humiliation. This is not merely a spiritual rebuke. It is a societal crisis of the highest order. In the post-exilic province of Yehud, there is no king. The Davidic throne remains empty. The political structure of the province rests upon two pillars: the Persian appointed governor and the high priest. The governor handles civil administration, tax collection, and relations with the satrapy. The priest handles the spiritual life of the community, the teaching of the law, the administration of justice in religious matters, and the maintenance of the temple. When the priests fail, there is no other institution to fill the void. The moral fabric of the entire province unravels. Without faithful teaching, the people drift into ignorance. Without righteous judgment, disputes fester and injustice spreads. Without holy example, the community loses its sense of distinctiveness and begins to assimilate into the surrounding pagan cultures. Archaeological evidence from this period provides a tangible connection to the administrative world in which these priests operated. Excavations in the city of David have uncovered Persian period bully, small clay seal impressions used to authenticate official documents. These tiny artifacts, no larger than a fingernail, bear Hebrew names and titles related to the administration and priesthood of the era. They confirm the existence of a bureaucratic structure surrounding the temple, a system of record-keeping, authorization, and accountability. The priests were not isolated spiritual figures. They were embedded in a complex administrative network, responsible for managing the temple's resources, overseeing the sacrificial schedule, and maintaining the records of the community. The Bolet remind us that the priesthood was as much an institution as it was a vocation, and that its failure carried institutional as well as spiritual consequences. The physical setting of the priest's teaching ministry adds another layer of understanding to Malachi's indictment. Within the temple complex, there were specific chambers designated for the reading, copying, and teaching of the law. These were not grand lecture halls, but modest rooms, perhaps lined with shelves or niches where the precious scrolls of the Torah were stored. The scrolls themselves were handwritten on parchment or papyrus, carefully copied by trained scribes and treated with the utmost reverence. To unroll a scroll in the teaching court was to handle the very words of God. The priests who sat in these chambers, who held the scrolls in their hands, who read the words aloud to the gathered people, bore an extraordinary responsibility. Every word they taught, every interpretation they offered, every judgment they rendered, carried the weight of divine authority. And yet, in the time of Malachi, this sacred trust has been violated. The priests have not merely been negligent, they have been actively destructive. They have corrupted the covenant of Levi. They have turned the teaching courts into places of compromise rather than instruction. They have used their position not to elevate the people toward holiness, but to accommodate their own financial needs and social ambitions. The law of truth has been replaced by the law of convenience. The covenant of life and peace has been reduced to a transaction of polluted bread and blemished animals. Any thorough Book of Malachi summary must recognize that this chapter represents the moral and theological center of the entire book. The failure of the priesthood is not a peripheral issue. It is the root cause of the social and spiritual decay that permeates every aspect of life in Yehud. When the teachers fail, the students wander. When the judges are corrupt, justice dies. When the mediators between God and man are compromised, the entire community is left without a bridge to the divine. As the teaching courts fall silent and the scrolls gather dust in their niches, the consequences of the priest's failure ripple outward into every household, every family, and every marriage in the province. The law that was supposed to protect the vulnerable, to uphold the covenant of marriage, and to defend the widow and the orphan has been distorted or ignored. And nowhere is this failure more painfully visible than in the breakdown of the most fundamental social unit in ancient Israel, the covenant of marriage between a man and the wife of his youth. The failure of the priesthood to uphold the law did not remain confined to the teaching courts of the temple or the smoking altar of sacrifice. Like a contagion, this spiritual compromise seeped out from the sacred mount, down the steep, winding streets of Jerusalem, and into the quiet, sun-baked courtyards of the city's homes. In ancient Israel, the family was not merely a social convenience, it was the foundational unit of the covenant, the primary vessel through which the knowledge of Jehovah was transmitted from one generation to the next. When the spiritual leaders failed, the moral fabric of the family inevitably began to unravel. And nowhere was this unraveling more painful, more destructive, and more offensive to God than in the widespread breakdown of the marriage covenant. Malachi chapter 2, verses 10 and 11 opens with a series of piercing rhetorical questions that strike at the heart of the community's identity. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother by profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. the prophet uses the language of family and creation to highlight the absurdity of their treachery. If they are all children of the same Creator, bound by the same ancestral covenant, how can they act so deceitfully toward one another? The specific sin named here is marrying the daughter of a strange god. This was not merely a matter of crossing ethnic boundaries, it was a profound spiritual compromise. These were women who worshipped foreign deities, whose families were steeped in the pagan practices of the surrounding nations. By bringing them into the covenant community, the men of Yehud were actively introducing syncretism, the blending of true worship with pagan idolatry, into the very heart of their households. To understand why the men of Judah would make such a fateful choice, one must consider the social and economic pressures of the Persian period. Yehud was a small, vulnerable province surrounded by powerful, wealthy neighbors. For an ambitious merchant, a landowner, or a local official, marrying into a prominent pagan family could secure lucrative trade agreements, provide political protection, and elevate one's social standing within the broader administrative structure of the empire. It was a calculated move, a transaction disguised as a romance. The ancient courtyards of Jerusalem, where families once gathered to celebrate the feasts of Jehovah and recite the stories of the Exodus, were now being shared with altars to foreign gods and practices that violated the most basic tenets of the Mosaic Law. The holiness of the community was being bartered away for economic advantage and social prestige. But this pursuit of foreign alliances required a devastating sacrifice. To marry these wealthy or influential pagan women, the men of Judah were discarding their current wives. Malachi chapter 2 verse 13 describes the tragic emotional toll this took on the spiritual life of the nation. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with goodwill at your hand. The altar, which was supposed to be a place of joyful communion and atonement, had become a place of profound grief. The tears covering the stones were not tears of repentance. They were the tears of the abandoned women, the wives of their youth, who had been cast aside, stripped of their honor, and left destitute. God declares that he will not accept the offerings of men whose hands are stained with the betrayal of their own families. The smoke of their sacrifices is choked by the weeping of the innocent. When confronted with this devastating reality, the people respond with their characteristic cynical confusion. Yet ye say, wherefore? Why is God rejecting our worship? Malachi chapter 2 verse 14 provides the unforgettable answer. Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. In the biblical worldview, marriage is not a mere contract that can be dissolved when it becomes inconvenient. It is a sacred covenant, and Jehovah himself is the witness to the vows spoken in the days of their youth. The wife is described as a companion and a partner in the covenant. To betray her is not just a social failing. It is an act of treason against a bond that God himself has overseen and sanctified. This brings us to one of the most famous and frequently misunderstood declarations in the entire prophetic corpus, a phrase that has echoed through centuries of theological reflection. In addressing the casual, callous manner in which these men were dissolving their marriages, the prophet delivers a divine verdict that directly addresses the modern search for biblical clarity on the topic. When scholars and seekers alike explore the concept that God hates divorce, Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, stands as the definitive anchor. The King James Version renders the solemn decree, "For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth." The phrase "putting away" refers to the act of divorce. The men of Judah were exploiting a provision found in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, which permitted a man to write a bill of divorcement if he found some uncleanness in his wife. Originally intended as a protective measure to ensure that a discarded woman had legal proof of her single status and could remarry without being accused of adultery, this law had been grotesquely twisted by the men of Malachi's day. They were using it as a convenient legal loophole to abandon aging Jewish wives in order to pursue younger, wealthier, or pagan women. God sees through the legalistic veneer. He calls it what it truly is: violence. To discard a loyal companion for selfish gain is an act of profound cruelty, a spiritual violence that the man attempts to cover with his garment, hiding his shame beneath the respectable folds of his outer clothing and the legal documents of the Persian courts. The moral laxity that Malachi condemned in the hills of Judea was not an isolated phenomenon. Stunning archaeological discoveries from the exact same historical period provide a remarkable window into the casual attitude toward marriage and divorce that had infected the broader Jewish community during the Persian Empire. Far to the south, on an island in the Nile River near the border of Egypt and Nubia, lay the military colony of Elephantine. Here, a garrison of Jewish mercenaries served the Persian crown, and they left behind a treasure trove of documents known as the Elephantine Papyri. Dating to the 5th century BCE, the very era of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi, these fragile, sun-dried papyri written in Aramaic reveal a community that had drifted far from the strict orthodoxy of Jerusalem. Among the legal contracts, letters, and receipts are detailed marriage agreements and divorce decrees that perfectly corroborate the societal trends Malachi so fiercely opposed. In the Elephantine community, divorce was treated as a purely secular financial transaction. Either the husband or the wife could initiate a divorce simply by standing in the public assembly and declaring, "I hate my husband," or "I hate my wife." The offending party was then required to pay a specified silver penalty, and the marriage was dissolved. The sacred, unbreakable covenant witnessed by Jehovah had been reduced to a conditional business contract, easily voided with the payment of a fine. Furthermore, the Elephantine Papyri reveal a shocking degree of syncretism and intermarriage. The Jewish soldiers on the island frequently married local Egyptian or Aramean women, and the legal documents record oaths sworn not only by Jehovah, but also by pagan deities such as Anat Yahu and Haram Bethel. The very boundaries that were supposed to separate the covenant people from the surrounding nations had been entirely erased. When the priests in Jerusalem read the letters and legal archives circulating through the Persian postal system, they would have seen the exact moral decay that Malachi was warning against. The casual divorce, the intermarriage, the blending of religions, it was a cultural epidemic that threatened to extinguish the unique identity of the Jewish people. The geographic reality of Yehud only exacerbated this vulnerability. The domestic courtyards of Jerusalem were not isolated fortresses. They were open to the bustling trade routes and cultural currents of the ancient Near East. The influence of neighboring pagan territories, with their different customs regarding marriage, property, and women, constantly pressed against the borders of the province. Without the strong, faithful teaching of the Levitical priesthood to anchor the people in the law of Moses, the families of Yehud were slowly drifting downstream, carried away by the prevailing cultural tides of the Persian period. The tragedy of this era is that the breakdown of the marriage covenant was destroying the very mechanism of spiritual survival. In the ancient world, the home was the primary school of faith. It was around the family table in the quiet hours of the evening that fathers were commanded to teach their children the statutes of the Lord. But when the father acts treacherously, when he discards the mother of his children to pursue a pagan alliance, the spiritual foundation of the next generation is shattered. The children learn that covenants are meaningless, that loyalty is conditional, and that the God of Israel can be ignored in favor of social advancement. As the marriage covenants broke down in the courtyards of Jerusalem, and as the priesthood failed to sound the alarm from the Temple Mount, a deep, corrosive cynicism began to take root in the hearts of the people. If God was truly just, why did the treacherous prosper? Why did the men who broke their vows and married foreign women seem to thrive in the Persian economy, while the faithful struggled in their modest, terraced fields? The spiritual apathy that began with blemished sacrifices and corrupted teaching had now metastasized into a profound theological crisis. The people were no longer just weary, they were deeply, bitterly cynical, and they were ready to question the very justice of God. The breakdown of the marriage covenant and the corruption of the priesthood have left the province of Yehud in a state of profound moral confusion. When the leaders of the community, the very men entrusted with the oracles of God, act treacherously, and when the wicked seem to flourish while the faithful struggle to survive on their rocky terraced hills, a dangerous question begins to take root in the hearts of the people. It is a question that moves beyond simple apathy into the realm of bitter theological cynicism. If God is truly just, why does he remain silent while the covenant is broken? If he is truly the Lord of hosts, where is his judgment? This rising tide of accusation is recorded in Malachi chapter 2, verse 17. The prophet confronts the people with their own wearying words. Ye have wearied the Lord with your words, yet ye say, wherein have we wearied him? When ye say, every one that doeth evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delighteth in them, or where is the God of judgment? The Hebrew word translated as wearied implies a sense of exhaustion or toil. The people's cynicism is not just an insult, it is a burden to the Almighty. They look around at the Persian officials who extract heavy taxes, at the wealthy landowners who exploit the poor, and at the corrupt priests who offer blemished sacrifices, and they see no divine intervention. In their eyes, evil is not only unpunished, it appears to be successful. The ancient Deuteronomic promise that obedience brings blessing and disobedience brings cursing seems to have been suspended, replaced by a universe where the ruthless thrive and the righteous are forgotten. This theological crisis was unique to the post-exilic experience. In the days of the monarchy, The sins of the nation often brought immediate geopolitical consequences, invading armies, droughts, or plagues. But in the quiet, stable yet unglamorous era of the Persian Empire, life simply continued. The sun rose, the harvest came or failed, and the empire endured. There were no dramatic thunderbolts striking down the corrupt high priest. There were no sudden collapses of the Persian satrapy. To a generation that had expected a shaking of the nations and the immediate exaltation of Zion, this divine silence felt like indifference. They concluded, perhaps whispered in the shadows of the city gates, that God had either lost interest or lost the ability to judge. But the silence of heaven is about to be broken. In response to this charge of divine apathy, Malachi delivers one of the most startling and significant prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures. It is a declaration that shifts the gaze of the nation from their current misery to a future intervention of terrifying purity. Malachi chapter 3 verse 1 begins with a sudden urgent announcement. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. The prophecy speaks of two distinct figures, yet their missions are inextricably linked. First, there is the messenger who prepares the way, a forerunner who will clear the path for a royal arrival. Then there is the Lord, the Adon, who comes to his temple, identified here as the messenger of the covenant. For the people of Yehud who are asking, where is the God of judgment? The answer is both a promise and a threat. The God of judgment is indeed coming, and he is coming to his own house. The temple, which they have treated with such casual disrespect, will suddenly become the site of a divine visitation. However, the prophet immediately qualifies this promise with a question that strikes at the heart of their spiritual condition. Verse 2 asks, But who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. The coming of the messenger of the covenant is not described as a gentle, comforting arrival. It is likened to two of the most intense, transformative processes known to the ancient artisan: the refining of precious metals and the scouring of raw wool. To understand the power of this metaphor, one must step into the artisan quarters of ancient Jerusalem, perhaps in the narrow valleys where the smoke of industry mingled with the incense of the temple. Here, the metallurgists and silversmiths plied their trade. Archaeological excavations in and around Jerusalem have uncovered clay crucibles, tuyere, the nozzles used to blow air into a furnace, and slag heaps that testify to the sophisticated metalworking of the era. The process of refining silver was perilous and required immense skill. The silversmith would place the raw, impure ore into a crucible and subject it to intense heat, often exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. As the metal melted, the impurities, the dross, would rise to the surface. The refiner would sit by the furnace, watching the molten silver with unblinking intensity, skimming off the dross with a tool. He could not leave the fire, nor could he look away, for if the silver remained in the heat too long, it would be destroyed. The process was complete only when the silver was so pure that the refiner could see his own reflection in the surface of the liquid metal. When Malachi describes God as a refiner's fire, He is portraying a deity who does not merely observe from a distance, but sits intimately close to the heat, purging the sons of Levi until they reflect his own holiness. The judgment is not for destruction, but for purification. The second metaphor is equally visceral: fuller's soap. In the ancient world, the fuller was the person responsible for cleansing and thickening newly woven woolen cloth. This was not a gentle washing with mild oils. The fuller used boreth, a harsh vegetable alkali or potash, often combined with urine, to scour the dirt and grease from the fibers. The cloth would be trampled underfoot in vats of this caustic solution, beaten and agitated until every stain was removed. It was a rough chemical and exhausting process. To say that the coming messenger is like fuller's soap is to warn that the cleansing of the nation will be abrasive and uncomfortable. It will strip away the grime of syncretism, the stains of compromise, and the filth of moral apathy. The purpose of this fiery purification is specific. Verse 3 declares, "And he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. And he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness." The judgment begins at the house of God. Before the nation can be restored, the priesthood must be cleansed. The corrupt men who have offered blind and lame animals, who have wearied God with their words, and who have broken the covenant of Levi, must pass through the fire. Only when the priests are purified can the worship of Yehud once again be acceptable. Then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord, as in the days of old and as in former years. But for those who refuse the refiner's fire, the warning is absolute. Verse 5 lists the specific social sins that will be brought to swift judgment. "And I will come near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against false swearers, and against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, and that turn aside the stranger from his right, and fear not me, saith the Lord of hosts." This list connects directly back to the social breakdown described in previous chapters. The adulterers are those who have divorced the wives of their youth. The oppressors of the hireling are the wealthy landowners who withhold wages. The sorcerers represent the creeping pagan influence that has infiltrated the community. The messenger of the covenant is coming as a defender of the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, those who have been crushed by the treachery of the powerful. The promise of the messenger of the covenant would echo through the centuries of the intertestamental period, becoming a beacon of hope for a faithful remnant who waited in the darkness. They would watch the horizon, not for a Persian courier, but for the refiner who would come to his temple. Yet, before that distant day of fire and purification could arrive, the people of Malachi's day had a more immediate, practical crisis to address. The temple was currently being starved of resources, the Levites were abandoning their posts, and the economic machinery of worship was grinding to a halt. The spiritual apathy had led to a financial robbery of God Himself, a theft that needed to be repented of before any refining fire could be endured. The vision of the refining fire and the fuller's soap lingers in the minds of the people like the heat of a furnace felt from a distance. The promise of the messenger of the covenant is certain, yet it belongs to a future that the current generation can only glimpse through the haze of prophetic language. But before that distant day of purification arrives, there is a present crisis that demands immediate attention, a crisis not of theology or philosophy, but of grain, oil, and the simple economics of worship. The temple stands, the altar smokes, and the festivals are observed. Yet the machinery that sustains this sacred institution is grinding toward a halt. The storehouse is empty, the Levites are starving, and God has been robbed. The transition from the cosmic promise of the refining messenger to the practical matter of agricultural tithes is not abrupt. It is grounded in a profound theological declaration that anchors everything Malachi has said and everything he is about to say. Malachi chapter 3 verse 6 opens with words of unshakable stability. For I am the Lord, I change not, therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. In a world of shifting empires, changing governors, and uncertain harvests, the character of God remains constant. He does not capriciously withdraw his covenant. He does not abandon his people because they disappoint him. It is precisely because he is unchanging that the sons of Jacob still exist, still inhabit their small province, still have a temple and a priesthood. Their very survival is evidence of his faithfulness. And yet, this unchanging God issues a call that requires a response. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, saith the Lord of hosts. The language is that of a fractured relationship, a covenant bond that has been strained by neglect and disobedience. God is not commanding them to rebuild the temple or to establish a new priesthood. He is asking them to return to a relationship they have already entered but have quietly abandoned. The people, in their characteristic defensiveness, respond with the same weary question they have asked throughout the book. But ye said, wherein shall we return? They cannot see their own failure. They cannot identify the specific point at which they departed from the covenant. And so God names it with devastating clarity. Malachi chapter 3 verses 8 and 9. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. The word rob is striking. It is not the language of forgetfulness or oversight. It is the language of theft, of deliberate withholding, of taking what belongs to another. The tithe, the 10th portion of the agricultural produce, was not a voluntary gift or a charitable donation. It was a sacred obligation, a divinely mandated transfer of resources from the fields of Israel to the service of the sanctuary. To withhold it was not merely stinginess, it was robbery against God himself. To understand the gravity of this charge, one must understand the economic architecture of the Second Temple. The tithe was not an abstract financial contribution. It was a physical, tangible transfer of agricultural produce, grain, wine, and oil, gathered from the terraced hillsides of Judah and delivered to specific storage chambers within the temple complex. The Mosaic Law established this system in the Book of Numbers, chapter 18, where the Levites were designated as recipients of the tithe in exchange for their service in the sanctuary. The Levites possessed no territorial inheritance among the tribes of Israel. They had no fields, no vineyards, no olive groves of their own. Their portion was the Lord himself, and the material expression of that portion was the 10th of the produce brought by the other tribes. This economic dependence was absolute. Without the tithe, the Levites could not eat. Without the tithe, they could not maintain their families. Without the tithe, they could not devote themselves to the teaching of the law, the administration of justice, or the service of the altar. When the people of Yehud began withholding their tithes, whether through neglect, resentment, or simple economic desperation, the consequences were immediate and devastating. The Levites, faced with the choice between starvation and survival, abandoned their posts at the temple and fled to the countryside to farm for themselves. The singers left their stations. The gatekeepers deserted their gates. The teachers ceased their instruction. The entire apparatus of worship ground to a halt because the economic foundation that sustained it had been destroyed. The physical reality of this crisis can be visualized in the storehouse chambers of the temple complex. These were not grand, ornate halls, but functional storage rooms, stone-lined chambers designed to receive, preserve, and distribute the agricultural wealth of the nation. They were built to hold massive quantities of grain in sealed jars, amphorae of pressed olive oil, and vessels of new wine. The storehouse was the economic heart of the temple, the place where the tithes were collected, inventoried, and distributed to the priestly and Levitical families according to their divisions. When the storehouse was full, the worship of God flourished. When it was empty, the entire system collapsed. It is this empty storehouse that God commands them to fill. Malachi chapter 3 verse 10 delivers the specific instruction. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. The phrase, that there may be meat in mine house, is not merely about food. It is about the sustenance of worship itself. Without grain in the storehouse, there are no grain offerings. Without oil, there are no libations. Without the economic support of the Levites, there are no voices to sing, no hands to serve, no minds to teach. The temple becomes a hollow shell, a building without a purpose. But what makes this passage extraordinary, and what has made Malachi 3 tithing one of the most searched and discussed topics in biblical studies, is the invitation that follows. God does not merely command, He invites. Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. The word prove is remarkable. In the entire Scripture, this is one of the very few instances where God explicitly invites His people to test Him. He stakes His own faithfulness on the outcome of their obedience. Bring the tithes, He says, and watch what I do. Open the floodgates of your generosity, and I will open the windows of heaven. The promise is agricultural and specific. Verse 11 continues, And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground. Neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, saith the Lord of hosts. The devourer is the locust, the blight, the drought, the pestilence that threatens every agrarian community in the ancient Near East. God promises to protect the harvest, to ensure that the vine does not drop its fruit prematurely, that the grain reaches full maturity before the sickle is put to it. Verse 12 concludes with the vision of abundance. And all nations shall call you blessed, for ye shall be a delightsome land, saith the Lord of hosts. The restored obedience of the people will transform the land itself into a place of beauty and productivity, visible even to the surrounding nations. This crisis of the empty storehouse was not merely a prophetic abstraction. It was a historical reality that unfolded in the streets and fields of Yehud during the very period of Malachi's ministry. The connection between Malachi and Nehemiah is one of the most compelling historical parallels in the post-exilic scriptures. Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 10 through 14, records the exact same crisis from the perspective of the governor. "And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field. Then contended I with the rulers, and said, Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together, and set them in their place." Nehemiah, the energetic governor who had rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem and reorganized the civic life of the province, returned from a period of absence at the Persian court to find the temple in a state of economic collapse. The tithes had not been collected. The Levites had scattered to their fields. The worship of God had been abandoned because the people had chosen to keep their produce for themselves rather than deliver it to the storehouse. Nehemiah's response was immediate and forceful. He confronted the rulers, reappointed the treasurers, and restored the system of collection and distribution. The parallel between Nehemiah's historical action and Malachi's prophetic rebuke is so precise that many scholars conclude they were contemporaries addressing the same crisis from different angles of authority. The agricultural terraces that surrounded Jerusalem provide the geographic backdrop for this entire drama. The Judean hills, with their carefully constructed stone terraces, were the source of the grain, wine, and oil that sustained the temple economy. These terraces, many of which can still be seen today in the valleys and hillsides around Jerusalem, represented generations of backbreaking labor. Each terrace was built stone by stone, retaining wall by retaining wall, to prevent the precious topsoil from washing away during the winter rains. The farmers who worked these terraces were not wealthy landowners. They were subsistence cultivators who lived close to the edge of famine. To ask them to surrender a tenth of their harvest to the temple was to ask for genuine sacrifice, a real cost that touched their daily survival. And yet the covenant demanded it. The tithe was not a tax imposed by a distant government. It was the economic expression of a spiritual truth. The land belonged to God. The people were stewards, not owners. The 10th portion was a tangible acknowledgement that every sheaf of grain, every cluster of grapes, every drop of oil was ultimately a gift from the Creator. To withhold it was to declare independence from that Creator, to say that the harvest was theirs alone, that they owed nothing to the one who sent the rain and the sunshine. The empty storehouse was therefore not merely an economic problem. It was a spiritual diagnosis. It revealed a people who had ceased to trust in God's provision, who had chosen self-preservation over covenant faithfulness, and who had allowed the machinery of worship to starve while they clutched their grain in anxious hands. The call to bring the tithes into the storehouse was ultimately a call to trust, to believe that the God who does not change will sustain those who honor Him with their substance. As the call to repentance echoes across the terraced hills and through the empty chambers of the temple, a quiet division begins to form within the community. Not all who hear the prophet's words respond with the same cynicism. There are some, perhaps a small number, perhaps a scattered remnant, who still fear the Lord, who still speak of His faithfulness to one another in the quiet corners of the city. And God, in His unchanging attention, is listening to them. as the prophetic message of Malachi echoes through the terraced hills and the empty storehouses of Yehud, a profound and quiet division begins to take shape within the covenant community. The province is not a monolith of uniform belief or shared spiritual exhaustion. Instead, a deep sociological and theological fracture is forming between the arrogant majority and a faithful, overlooked remnant. The prophet records the harsh, cynical words of the majority in Malachi chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. "Your words have been stout against me, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, What have we spoken so much against thee? Ye have said, It is vain to serve God. And what profit is it that we have kept his ordinance, and that we have walked mournfully before the Lord of hosts?" This is the voice of profound spiritual disillusionment. The arrogant majority looks at the economic hardships of the Persian period, the heavy taxation, and the lack of immediate miraculous blessing, and concludes that the covenant is a bad investment. They argue that serving God yields no tangible profit. In verse 15, their cynicism deepens into a celebration of the wicked. "And now we call the proud happy. Yea, they that tempt God are even delivered. Yea, they that work wickedness are set up." In their eyes, the ruthless merchants, the corrupt officials, and the treacherous priests who compromise with the surrounding pagan cultures are the ones who truly prosper. To this majority, the fear of the Lord is a foolish relic of a bygone era, an unnecessary burden that only hinders social and economic advancement in the vast Achaemenid Empire. But amidst this rising tide of cynicism, a different response is taking root. It is not loud, it is not politically powerful, and it does not control the levers of the temple economy. Yet it is the very heartbeat of God's enduring purpose for Israel. Malachi chapter 3 verse 16 captures this beautiful, quiet resistance. "Then they that feared the Lord spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it." While the arrogant majority speaks stout words against heaven, the faithful remnant speaks to one another. They gather not in the grand compromised courts of the temple, but in the quiet peripheral neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Geographically, 5th century Jerusalem is a modest settlement, largely confined to the narrow ridge of the city of David and the adjacent Temple Mount. But away from the bustling markets, the administrative buildings of the Persian governor, and the noisy disputes of the corrupt priesthood, there are quiet courtyards and humble homes where the light of faith still burns. Here, in the long shadows of the late afternoon, small groups of faithful worshipers gather. They are the farmers who still bring their unblemished first fruits, the widows who trust in God's provision, the Levites who refuse to compromise the law for a meal. They speak often one to another, encouraging each other in the ancient promises, reminding one another that the silence of heaven is not the absence of God, and heaven is listening. The text continues with a profound assurance. "And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name." In the ancient Near East, the concept of a divine record was a powerful and comforting metaphor. Kings kept meticulous chronicles of the deeds of their loyal subjects, ensuring that faithful service would be remembered and rewarded in due time. The Book of Esther, for example, records how the Persian king Ahasuerus, suffering from insomnia, commands the book of records of the Chronicles to be read, leading to the honor of the faithful Jew Mordecai. But God's Book of Remembrance is far more intimate and secure than the clay tablets or papyrus scrolls of earthly monarchs. To understand the cultural weight of this imagery, one can look to the archaeological discoveries of ancient scribal tools throughout the Levant. Excavations in the Judean desert and the ruins of ancient Judah have uncovered the physical implements of the ancient record keepers: bronze and iron styluses, carefully carved inkwells made of stone or clay, and fragile fragments of parchment and papyrus. These artifacts illustrate a society that placed immense value on the written word, on contracts, on genealogies, and on the meticulous transmission of history. The scribes of the post-exilic period were engaged in the sacred work of copying and preserving the scrolls of the Torah, ensuring that the words of the covenant would survive the ravages of time. When Malachi speaks of a book of remembrance written before the Almighty, he is drawing on this deep cultural reverence for the written record. God is acting as the ultimate scribe, inscribing the names, the whispered conversations, and the quiet faithfulness of his people into an eternal, unalterable ledger. No act of devotion, no matter how small or unseen by the world, is forgotten by the Creator. From this divine record flows one of the most comforting and tender promises in all of the Hebrew Scriptures. Malachi chapter 3, verse 17 records the decree of the Lord of hosts. "And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them, as a man spareth his own son that serveth him." The imagery shifts from the formal courtroom of a king to the intimate, protective love of a father. The faithful remnant are described as God's jewels, or more accurately translated from the Hebrew, his special treasure or peculiar possession. In a world where they are treated as insignificant subjects of a foreign empire, overlooked by the corrupt religious establishment and mocked by their cynical neighbors, God declares that they are his most prized possession. The promise of sparing is equally deeply moving. "I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him." In the agrarian society of ancient Yehud, a father working in the fields or the vineyards would naturally show compassion to his son who labored alongside him. He would not drive the boy to exhaustion. He would provide shade, water, and rest. He would protect him from the harshest elements of the sun and the storm. This is the exact nature of God's dealing with the faithful remnant. When the refining fire of the messenger of the covenant finally comes, when the day of judgment arrives to purge the wickedness from the land, the faithful will not be consumed. They will be shielded, protected, and spared by the tender compassion of their heavenly Father. This distinction brings us to a crucial historical and theological reality of the post-exilic period: the sociology of the remnant. Any thorough Book of Malachi summary must grapple with the fact that the return from Babylonian exile was a physical restoration, but it did not automatically guarantee a spiritual one. Not everyone who walked back through the gates of Jerusalem under Zerubbabel, Ezra, or Nehemiah possessed a heart that truly feared the Lord. The community was a mixed multitude. There were those who returned merely to reclaim ancestral real estate, to rebuild their economic fortunes, and to reestablish their social standing within the Persian province. And then there were those who returned because their souls yearned for the presence of Jehovah, who wept for the desolation of Zion, and who desired above all else to see the purity of the covenant restored. Malachi's ministry serves to draw a bright, unmistakable line between these two groups. The division is no longer primarily between Jew and Gentile, or between Israel and the surrounding pagan nations. The division has moved inside the camp. It is a division of the heart. The arrogant and the faithful live in the same province, walk the same dusty roads, and perhaps even attend the same temple festivals. But their spiritual destinies are entirely divergent. The result of this divine observation is a profound clarity. Malachi chapter 3 verse 18 concludes the thought with a vision of ultimate vindication. Then shall ye return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serveth God and him that serveth him not. The confusion of the present age, where the wicked seem to prosper and the righteous seem to suffer, is only temporary. A day is coming when the fog of history will lift, and the true nature of every heart will be exposed. The distinction between the one who serves God and the one who does not will be as clear as the dawn breaking over the Mount of Olives. For the weary, faithful listener in the quiet courtyards of Jerusalem, this promise is a deep, settling peace. They do not need to strive for the approval of the Persian governor or the corrupt high priest. Their names are already written in the Book of Remembrance. They are the special treasure of the Lord of hosts. And as the sun sets on the province of Yehud, casting a warm, golden light over the limestone walls of the city, the faithful remnant rests in the assurance of their Father's love. But this quiet assurance is merely the prelude to the final, sweeping vision of the Hebrew Scriptures. The prophet must now look beyond the immediate horizon of the Persian period, beyond the empty storehouses and the compromised altars, to the ultimate day of the Lord, a day that will burn away the dross of the ages and usher in the healing light of the Messiah. The faithful remnant rests in the assurance of the Book of Remembrance, their names inscribed before the throne of heaven, their quiet devotion treasured by the Lord of hosts. But the prophet's vision does not end with comfort alone. From the quiet courtyards where the faithful gather, Malachi now lifts his gaze to the ultimate horizon, the final day of reckoning that will separate the arrogant from the righteous, the chaff from the grain, the darkness from the dawn. This is the last prophetic utterance that will be recorded in the Hebrew Scriptures. After these words, the heavens will fall silent for 400 years. Malachi chapter 4 verse 1 opens with an image of absolute, consuming judgment. For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. The metaphor is drawn from the agrarian world that the people of Yehud knew intimately. In the late summer, after the grain harvest, the fields were sometimes burned to clear away the remaining stubble. The fire moved quickly and completely, consuming every dried stalk, every withered root, until nothing remained but blackened earth and drifting ash. The proud and the wicked, those who have oppressed the poor, broken the marriage covenant, offered blemished sacrifices, and mocked the justice of God, are likened to this stubble. They are dry, brittle, and utterly combustible. When the day of the Lord arrives, it will consume them completely, leaving neither root nor branch, neither foundation nor legacy. But this terrifying image of judgment is immediately balanced by a vision of incomparable beauty and tenderness. Verse 2 turns from the destruction of the wicked to the deliverance of the faithful. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. The contrast is deliberate and profound. The same day that burns the wicked, like stubble, becomes for those who fear God's name the dawning of a radiant, healing light. The Malachi bore 4. Son of Righteousness is one of the most beloved Messianic images in all of the Hebrew Scriptures. It speaks of a figure who will rise like the morning sun, bringing warmth, illumination, and life to a world that has languished in the cold shadows of sin and spiritual darkness. The imagery of healing in his wings is particularly striking. The Hebrew word for wings here can also be rendered as rays, evoking the image of the sun's rays spreading across the sky at dawn, touching every corner of the earth with gentle, warming light. This is not the harsh, scorching heat of the midday desert sun. It is the tender, life-giving warmth of the first light that breaks over the eastern hills, melting the frost, awakening the sleeping earth, and bringing vitality to every living thing. For the faithful remnant who have endured the long night of spiritual apathy and covenant betrayal, this healing light represents the ultimate restoration of all that has been broken. The promise continues with an image of joyful freedom. And ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. In the agrarian landscape of ancient Judah, calves kept in stalls were confined, restricted, and unable to roam freely. The image of the calf being released from its stall speaks of liberation, of joyful exuberance, of unhindered growth. The righteous, who have been confined by the oppression of the wicked, by the corruption of the priesthood, and by the crushing weight of an indifferent empire, will be released into the freedom of God's kingdom. They will grow and flourish like young animals let loose into green pastures, their vitality restored, their joy uncontainable. Verse 3 adds a final note of vindication. And ye shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. The righteous will not merely be spared from the judgment, they will stand in victory over the forces that oppress them. The wicked, reduced to ashes by the refining fire of divine justice, will be beneath the feet of the faithful. This is not a vision of personal vengeance or human triumph. It is the assurance that justice will ultimately prevail, that the long night of treachery and cynicism will give way to a morning of righteous vindication. Having delivered this sweeping vision of the final day, the prophet now turns to practical instruction. Verse 4 is a direct command to the entire nation. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. This is the last word of instruction before the silence descends. Remember the law. Hold fast to the commandments given at Sinai. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is the enduring foundation upon which the people must stand through the long centuries ahead. Without a king, without immediate prophetic guidance, without visible miracles, the people are to anchor themselves in the written word. The statutes and judgments given at Horeb are not obsolete relics of a bygone era. They are the living constitution of the covenant community, the unchanging standard by which faithfulness is measured. Then comes the final extraordinary promise, the last words ever recorded by a prophet of the Hebrew canon. Verse 5 declares, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Elijah, the fiery prophet who had confronted the kings of Israel, who had called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, who had been taken up in a whirlwind without tasting death, is promised as a forerunner. Before the great and dreadful day arrives, before the Son of Righteousness appears, there will be a preparatory voice, a prophet in the spirit and power of Elijah, who will prepare the hearts of the people for what is to come. Verse 6 describes the mission of this coming Elijah. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. The language is one of reconciliation, the healing of broken relationships, the restoration of generational bonds, the mending of the fractured family. In a world where fathers have abandoned their wives, where priests have corrupted the law, where the covenant has been treated with contempt, the Elijah figure will call the people back to the fundamental bonds of love, loyalty, and mutual responsibility. Without this preparation, the day of the Lord would come not as healing, but as a curse. With these final words, the prophetic voice falls silent. Malachi is the last prophet of the Old Testament, the closing voice of a canon that spans centuries of divine revelation. After him, there will be no more prophets for 400 years, no more oracles, no more burdens, no more visions recorded in the sacred scroll. The heavens will be silent as the Persian Empire gives way to the Greeks, as Alexander the Great sweeps through the ancient Near East, as the Ptolemies and Seleucids divide the land between them, as the Maccabean revolt restores a measure of Jewish independence, and as Rome extends its iron hand across the Mediterranean world. Through all these centuries of silence, the words of Malachi serve as the enduring anchor of hope. The faithful carry them like a lamp in the darkness. The Son of Righteousness will rise. The messenger of the covenant will come. The Elijah figure will prepare the way. These promises sustain generation after generation of Jews who wait, watch, and pray in the long intertestamental night. The scroll is closed, but the promise remains open, waiting for its fulfillment. And when that fulfillment finally arrives, it will come not in the courts of the temple or the halls of the governor, but in the wild, windswept wilderness of Judea, beside the ancient waters of the Jordan River. The geographical reality of this landscape, the rugged cliffs of the Judean desert, the winding course of the Jordan cutting through the Rift Valley, the sparse vegetation and harsh terrain that stretches toward the Dead Sea, becomes the stage upon which the promise is finally enacted. It is here, in this austere and ancient landscape, that a voice will cry out, calling the people to repentance, preparing the way for the one who is to come. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verse 17, identifies this voice and connects it directly to the final prophecy of Malachi. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. John the Baptist, the son of Zechariah the priest, born in the hill country of Judea, living in the wilderness until the day of his appearing, fulfills the ancient promise of the Elijah figure. He appears at the Jordan, calling the people to turn their hearts, to prepare for the arrival of the one whom Malachi called the messenger of the covenant, the Son of Righteousness with healing in his wings. The Kidron Valley, which runs between the walls of Jerusalem and the slopes of the Mount of Olives, has witnessed the passage of every generation from David to Malachi and beyond. The Mount of Olives itself, rising to the east of the Temple Mount, has watched the sun rise over the Judean wilderness for thousands of years. It is over this landscape that the first light at dawn has broken every morning of the intertestamental centuries, a daily reminder that the Sun of Righteousness will one day rise in fulfillment of the prophet's words. The horizon that Malachi gazed upon is the same horizon that the faithful remnant watched, the same horizon that John the Baptist emerged from, and the same horizon from which the healing light finally dawned. The last prophet of the Old Testament has spoken. The scroll is sealed. The canon of the Hebrew Scriptures is complete. But the story does not end in silence. It ends with a promise of fire and healing, of judgment and mercy, of Elijah's return and the sun's rising. The final word of the Hebrew prophets is not a period. It is an ellipsis, a sacred pause, a held breath that stretches across 4 centuries until the voice cries out in the wilderness and the long night finally breaks into dawn. As the sun sets one final time over the Judean hills, casting its golden light across the terraced slopes and the ancient stones of Jerusalem, the words of Malachi linger in the evening air like the last notes of a sacred song. The prophet has fulfilled his mandate. He has confronted the apathetic, exposed the corrupt, defended the vulnerable, and pointed the faithful toward the coming dawn. Now the people must wait. But they do not wait in darkness. They wait with the Book of Remembrance in their hearts and the promise of the Sun of Righteousness shining on the horizon of their hope. The final words of the prophet Malachi have been spoken. The scroll is sealed. The canon of the Hebrew Scriptures is complete. And now, as the night deepens over the ancient hills of Judea, there remains only the quiet echo of a voice that spoke across the centuries, a voice that carried the weight of divine love, the sting of righteous rebuke, and the gentle warmth of an unbreakable promise. The legacy of the prophet Malachi is not found in grand political victories or in the overthrow of empires. He did not topple kings or part seas. He did not call down fire from heaven or raise the dead. His ministry was quieter, more intimate, and in many ways more demanding. He stood in the small, dusty province of Yehud in the shadow of the vast Persian Empire, and he spoke truth to a people who had forgotten how to listen. He confronted the priest who offered a blind lamb. He challenged the husband who discarded the wife of his youth. He rebuked the farmer who withheld his tithe. He answered a cynic who asked, "Where is the God of judgment?" And through it all, he pointed beyond the present darkness toward a dawn that would one day break over the horizon of history. The enduring lesson of Malachi's ministry is the unchanging nature of God's love. In a world where the people questioned whether they were still loved, where the evidence of their modest fields and subordinate status seemed to contradict the promises of the prophets, God declared simply and irrevocably, "I have loved you, saith the Lord." That love was not contingent upon prosperity. It was not dependent upon political independence. It was rooted in covenant faithfulness, in the sovereign choice that had set apart a people for himself before they had done anything to earn or deserve it. Through the centuries of silence that followed Malachi's ministry, through the rise and fall of empires, through persecution and exile and return, that love remained constant. It was the anchor that held the faithful remnant steady through the long night of waiting. The importance of reverence in worship and in the covenants of daily life stands as another enduring pillar of Malachi's message. The prophet reminded a complacent generation that the altar of God is not a convenience to be used or neglected according to human preference. The marriage covenant is not a contract to be dissolved when social advantage shifts. The tithe is not a tax to be evaded when the harvest is lean. These sacred obligations are expressions of a relationship, a living, breathing bond between the Creator and His people. When that bond is treated with casual indifference, the entire fabric of community begins to unravel. But when it is honored with reverence and faithfulness, it becomes the foundation upon which generations are built and upon which the blessings of heaven are poured out. And then there is the hope, the warm, golden, unshakable hope of the Son of Righteousness. Malachi did not close the Hebrew Scriptures with a word of finality. He closed them with a promise. The day that burns as an oven is real, and the judgment of the wicked is certain. But for those who fear God's name, there is another image waiting beyond the fire. It is the image of healing light rising over the eastern hills, spreading its warmth across the terraced fields, touching every wound with restoration, filling every shadow with the gentle glow of a new morning. The Son of Righteousness will arise. The messenger of the covenant will come. The Elijah figure will prepare the way. These are not abstract theological concepts. They are the living promises of a God who does not change, who does not forget, and who does not abandon His people to the darkness. Malachi's final words serve as the profound bridge between the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Greek Scriptures. The 400 years of prophetic silence that followed his ministry were not empty years. They were years of preparation, of waiting, of the slow unfolding of divine purpose. The Persian Empire gave way to the Greeks. The Greeks gave way to the Maccabees. The Maccabees gave way to Rome. And through it all, the words of Malachi were preserved, copied, read, and treasured by the faithful. They were the lamp that burned in the long night, the star that guided the eyes of every generation that looked toward the horizon and whispered, "When will He come?" And when the fullness of time arrived, the silence broke. A voice cried out in the wilderness beside the ancient waters of the Jordan. The Son of Righteousness rose over the hills of Judea. The promise that Malachi had spoken in the quiet province of Yehud was fulfilled in the living presence of the Messiah. The bridge was complete. The canon was not closed with a period, but with a promise, and that promise had found its answer. Now the ancient hills rest beneath the stars. The terraced fields lie still in the moonlight. The stones of Jerusalem, weathered by centuries of wind and rain and the slow passage of empires, hold their silence. The night air is cool and gentle, carrying with it the faint scent of olive groves and the distant sound of the Kidron Valley. The faithful remnant sleeps in peace, their names written in the Book of Remembrance, their hearts resting in the assurance of a love that never fails. The prophet Malachi has finished his work. The scroll is sealed. The message has been delivered. And the listener, carried gently through the corridors of ancient history, through the courts of the temple and the fields of Yehud, through the rebuke and the promise, through the fire and the healing light, may now rest. The Son of Righteousness has risen. The healing is in His wings, and the night is filled with the deep, quiet peace of a God who remembers, who loves, and who will never let his people go. Sleep now in the shadow of the Almighty. The story is complete, the promise is sure, and the dawn